As these opening images suggest, this is a poem that takes a humorous look at the English class system. The poem is in fact called The Class Game. We'll hear it in a second and you can decide for yourselves whether there's a serious message as well as a humorous take on our class system. Another thing to think about before we hear it is its relevance today. Mary Casey died in 1980, so this isn't a contemporary poem, but one could argue that the class system is as clearly defined now as it was when she wrote it. I've chosen pictures here really to suggest that point. Anyway, here's a reading of the poem to get us started.
How can you tell what class I'm from? I can talk posh like some, with an ollie in me mouth, down me nose, wearing at not a scarf with me second-hand clothes. So why do you always wince when you hear me say ta-ra to me ma instead of bye mummy dear? How can you tell what class I'm from? 'Cause we live in a corpy, not like some in a pretty little semi out Wirral way and commute into Liverpool by train each day. Or did I drop my unemployment card sitting on your patio? We have a yard. How can you tell what class I'm from? Have I a label on me head and another on me bum? Or is it because my hands are stained with toil instead of soft lily white with perfume and oil? Don't I crook me little finger when I drink me tea? Say toilet instead of bog when I want to pee? Why do you care what class I'm from? Does it stick in your gullet like a sour plum? Well, mate, a cleaner is me mother, a docker is me brother. Bread pudding is wet Nelly, and me stomach is me belly, and I'm proud of the class that I come from.
On one level then, a humorous poem, but just like this cartoon, one that's making a serious point through humour. And I think when you hear that phrase, well mate, and the speaker in the poem talks about the pride that she has in her social class, there's a shift there. It becomes defiant, even angry. Why does she have to assert her pride? Well, because as a member of the working class, she feels that within English society, she's sneered at, patronised, looked down upon. The poem was written 30-40 years ago, but many people would argue that the situation is no different, maybe even worse. Elements of the modern media reinforce stereotypical representations of working class people. The word chav, which is a modern phenomenon, seems to be an expression of complete contempt for a whole section of society. That's Owen Jones's argument anyway in this book. He claims that the word chav demonises and ridicules a whole section of British society, which in his view is very wrong and promotes inequality. So Mary Casey is anticipating this really in her poem The Class Game, and through the voice of the speaker she's saying, I am worthwhile, I'm not a stereotype, and actually I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of my working class roots. So let's look at the poem now. Strong links with Agard's half-caste in that we hear in this poem the voice of an individual who is angry with the person that she's addressing. So in this case, it's somebody from the working class addressing somebody from the middle class whose attitudes the speaker finds offensive. So both the poems are dramatic monologues, one person talking to another and trying to make a point, both using humour as well. There are rhyming couplets within the poem which actually emphasise the speaker's accent when you look at the nature of those rhymes. We'll explore that later. But the poem itself is written in free verse. There's no regular rhyme scheme. It's one stanza long, which adds to this sense of it being a sort of outpouring of frustration about stereotypes. And it's also written in colloquial language, so we hear the authentic voice of a Liverpublian speaker. She uses dialect proudly, In fact, dialect is a theme in the poem. She's proud of her roots and she's proud of her language, which is not the BBC English, or more properly, the received pronunciation of higher class people. Her language ties her to the place where she was born. It's part of the community that she grew up in. That's certainly nothing to be ashamed of, and she will continue saying bog instead of toilet, for example. So, colloquial language, everyday language, a key element to this poem. I've said there are no stanzas, but the poem is split into sections divided by a refrain. So the line, "How can you tell which class I'm from?" opens the poem, obviously a reference to stereotyping. That's repeated 3 times, and each time it introduces a new angle on the working class stereotype which is being critiqued in this poem. The 4th time the refrain appears, it's slightly different, so it's "Why do you care which class I'm from?" The poet there challenging this need we have in the UK apparently to label and judge each other. Casey concludes her poem by rejecting that judgment and saying, "I'm proud of the class that I come from." Not much to say about this because we've already established that the poem is written from the point of view of a working class Liverpublian woman, one who's proud of her roots. So that's the voice that we're hearing. Let's now explore in a little bit more detail the imagery in the poem, in particular the contrasts. They're a key feature. They create a sense of us and them, as you'll see. So the poem begins with that line that becomes a refrain. How can you tell what class I'm from? The fact that it's a question creates immediately quite a challenging tone. So the speaker is challenging the listener to explain herself, explain her attitudes. Throughout the poem we have contrasts used to highlight the difference between working class and middle upper class people. Here the focus is on contrasting language. So whilst the speaker says "tra" to me ma, the person she's addressing might say "bye mummy dear." In this regard, perhaps you could actually criticise the speaker for having very judgmental attitudes towards the person she's addressing. Do people really talk like that? "Bye mummy dear"? Or is the speaker herself stereotyping? But I suppose that's what a segregated society does. It pits one social group against another. This division, this class conflict is reflected in phrases like "down me nose" and "I can talk posh like some," a real sense of resentment there, and the idea that the speaker could change herself, could present herself as posh if she wanted to, but that's not her choice. Already we sense that she's proud of who she is and actually despises this posh group. That's clear in the language. "I could talk with an ollie in my mouth," she says. Again, representing upper class people as ridiculous. The word "wince" is powerful in this section, the speaker suggesting that upper and middle class people wince when they hear her speak, as if it's painful to their delicate ears. References to clothing also highlight social division in this section. So the speaker refers to her second-hand clothes and the fact that higher class people are likely to wear hats. Notice the way she writes "at" and not "hat." That's how she speaks, and she's proud of it. A key message in the poem. If dropped H's make people wince, well, that's their problem. This Liverpublian speaker is changing for nobody. This stanza develops the theme of inequality by highlighting the difference in the living situations of working and middle class people. So the speaker refers to her corpy, that is a Liverpublian dialect term for council house. And the person she's addressing, she imagines to live in a pretty little semi in the Wirral. Now, the Wirral is a leafy, posh suburb of Liverpool. Hardship is suggested by the reference to unemployment card. So we have the contrast between middle-class people commuting in by train to work in the city and the speaker who hasn't actually got any work. Returning to the contrasting properties, we also have the difference between a patio and a yard. Yard sounds very functional, doesn't it? Very basic, whereas patio connotes luxury and style even. More frequent use of rhyme now, the rhyming couplets ending this section, way, day, card, yard, and those couplets emphasise vowel sounds and in particular the Liverpublian accent, so it would be sort of more card, yard, and I apologise, I am useless at accents. But a sense in which the poet is having fun with her accent in the poem, emphasising it through rhyme. The challenging tone of the poem intensifies in this section because of the repeated questions, 5 of them in quick succession. Again, strong links with the Agard poem Half Caste. There's some resentment in what's a centrally important image in the poem around hands. So she refers to her own hands as stained with toil, and contrasts those with the soft, lily white with perfume and oil hands of the upper class person that she's addressing. So those two images connote very different lifestyles. One characterised by slog, by graft, by having to work for a living, having to toil, whereas the other image connotes privilege, luxury, unfair social advantage. Perfume and oil suggests a decadent life. Don't I crook me little finger when I drink my tea? She asks, again deliberately using the non-standard dialect there, me little, me tea. But of course, again, poking fun at upper class people and the way they drink tea, according to the stereotype. In this final section, the poet makes explicit what has been implicit right from the first line, which is that she's proud of the class that she came from. She's proud of her language, of the dialect, which signals that she is from Liverpool. She's from a community, not from an upper class. And that pride means that she will continue to call bread pudding wet Nelly, and she will continue to refer to her stomach as her belly, because that is the way that she speaks, and she's proud of that. The second line, does it stick in your gullet like a sour plum, connects with that earlier use of the verb wince. She's saying here that she is judged and labelled for the way that she speaks, that people find it hard to swallow, it's ugly, abrasive, improper. But she's rejecting that view because this is the authentic voice of her community, a community that she's proud of. That phrase, well mate, is a real climactic moment in the poem. Afterwards, she talks about her family. A cleaner is my mother, a docker is my brother. So these are probably people who don't have lily white hands because they work really hard for a living. And nobody has any right to label, judge or criticise because, concluding line, I'm proud of the class that I come from. In almost every line, there are images which present the segregated nature of English society, the gulf in experience between the haves and the have-nots, the people that live in the suburbs and those that live in council houses, those that have patios, those that have yards, those that work as cleaners on shipyards as dockers, compared with those who travel to work on trains. and then escape again home to their pretty semis. There's clearly a bitterness in these contrasts, but there's also a defiance in this poem and a pride, and that's of course the idea that the work ends with, one of pride, that the speaker is pleased that she is who she is, and she will not be looked down upon or labelled. Neither will she change the way she speaks, not for anybody, not even for a poem. So this poem celebrates the Liverpublian dialect. I will say toilet instead of bog when I want to pee, she asserts. She's almost challenging us there not to wince like the upper class person that she's addressing in this poem. She's being deliberately provocative. This is a poem that's designed to unsettle us as readers, to make us think, to make us question our own attitudes, our own tendencies to label, to judge, to look down on people. Perhaps, having considered its message, we'll think twice about using that term chav again.